At the Unpopulist, we're big believers in liberal democracy. We're convinced it's the best way to ensure a free and open society. So we want to highlight the ways our democracies are helping us resist the rising tides of social alienation, polarization, and populism. For a good recent example of that, take a trip with me to Ireland.
Ireland
has seen its share of challenges in the 21st century, especially as one of the nations hardest hit by the 2008 global financial crisis.
The economy was overheating.
Property boom, price boom, and a construction boom.
A real estate bubble that just truly went haywire.
When the bubble burst, the building industry collapsed and a significant portion of the economy collapsed with it.
There was devastation right across the sector.
It really points to the way in which you have had a crisis which has come out of very bad politics and very bad ways of governance.
I believe that history will show that the government has worked hard in the national interest to implement difficult but necessary decisions.
What they'd actually done was to sign a guarantee that would consign Irish people and future governments to generations of debt.
And there was a lot of anger on the streets. There was a sort of growing clamour from about 2009 onwards that something had to be done about this. We needed change, we needed a reform.
This is David Farrell of University College Dublin. As anger over the fallout grew, he and a group of academics, political scientists, and constitutional scholars got together to ask, how do we address this? How can we help people feel as though their voices are actually being heard?
Let's get the angry citizens who are on the streets outside the Dáil into the centre of discussions about how we're going to change our political system. So what we did was we started writing opinion pieces and appearing on radio and on TV and talking about the time for a citizens' assembly to discuss political, institutional and constitutional reform in our system.
But how did they do it? They founded We the Citizens, an organization focused on encouraging something called deliberative democracy, a model of democracy that lies somewhere between two more common forms. Representative, where voters pick and choose representatives charged with implementing the popular will, and direct democracy, where voters directly manage their own policy decisions. We the Citizens didn't want to replace either per se. Rather, deliberation supplements other democratic practices by involving citizens more, but also preserving checks and balances. This was really important because, as Paul Meany of the Cato Institute told me, Irish politics have been highly concentrated and detached from the public for quite some time.
The problem in Ireland is everything is run from Dublin. It's a very centralised system. There's not a whole lot of local and federated control.
So the people of Ireland felt they needed a big shakeup to address the lack of citizen involvement in politics. We the Citizens thought deliberation was one way they could do it.
Our mission was to prove citizens are not stupid and a system like this can work in Ireland.
And soon, they would get their chance. In 2012, We the Citizens was chosen to advise the first Irish Convention on the Constitution, a deliberative mini-public. It consisted of 100 members, 66 randomly chosen Irish citizens, 33 members of the Irish Legislature and Northern Irish Assembly, appointed by various political parties, and one government-appointed chairperson. For every weekend over the course of 14 months, these 100 people met in a hotel conference room and listened to expert panels and citizen submissions on topics like the voting age, presidential term limits, migrant rights, and same-sex marriage. They then took part in facilitated discussions and voted on what they thought Ireland should do on all these issues. Those votes eventually made their way into a report that was given to the Irish legislature, who, by law, had to formally respond. In fact, the Constitutional Convention led Ireland to hold the vote that legalized same-sex marriage in May 2015, making Ireland the first ever nation to do so by popular vote, and countering the legacy of Ireland's conservative Catholic roots.
So Ireland's changed immensely. The old joke is that our president, Eamon de Valera, wrote the Constitution with the priest kind of looking over his shoulder. Kind of a homegrown love of Catholicism. That's kind of what formed the Irish identity in its modern iteration.
Since the early 1990s, the number of church-attending Catholics has fallen and attitudes have liberalised.
Something that's happened during my lifetime, and you can see it getting pushed further and further into the back. as I grew up, there was less and less Catholicism in the world.
The Constitutional Convention showed how public opinion of a previously highly contentious issue was not being accurately communicated to those in power, and allowed them to adjust accordingly. So in 2016, Ireland decided to try their hand at this again, but with some adjustments. The result was the Irish Citizens' Assembly, a similar deliberative forum, but this time composed entirely of random Irish citizens. No politicians involved.
So it's lottery. It's like jury duty. You get selected. You can't choose to be a member. You can't buy membership. You can't get elected.
The Assembly was tasked with deliberating on 5 topics, but right now we're only going to talk about one. This one is particularly important because it concerns one of the most contentious and emotionally charged issues in Ireland, or anywhere, really: abortion. Just like with same-sex marriage, this topic was very contentious because of the history of Catholic influence, but even more so because Ireland actually enshrined the fetal right to life into its constitution less than 40 years prior.
The Eighth Amendment was introduced in 1983 after 67% of Irish voters supported it in a referendum backed by the Catholic Church.
I think this issue in Ireland could never have gotten to the point we're at today were it not for the Citizens' Assembly. I think we would have been years getting there, if we ever got there.
Both pro-life and pro-choice speakers were invited over weeks of discussion to present their work on the subject. Over 13,000 submissions were given to the Assembly from outside individuals and groups, all of which were made available on the official Citizens' Assembly website, to make sure not only that the Assembly was representative, but also that what they were hearing was.
So you got random selection, you got an inclusive process, and then you have deliberation, facilitated small group discussion. So trained facilitators whose job is to make sure that everyone has equal voice, so that nobody feels that they've been dominated. And that's very carefully tracked.
And the members weren't simply voting yay or nay, abortion good or abortion bad. They were asked about the validity of abortion in various specific contexts, considering factors like the risk of carrying a child, the stage of fetal development, circumstances like sexual assault, mental health issues, and socioeconomic challenges. Only after 5 months of deliberation were the final votes of the Assembly held. Over 140 pages of findings were sent to the legislature, not just on abortion, but on the practice of deliberative democracy itself. The legislature then, by mandate, could have undertaken any number of measures in response, and ultimately voted to bring the topic to a national referendum.
Votes in favour of the proposal, 1,429,981.
The outcome was just as clear as it was in 1983, except this time, 67% of voters supported a right to abortion.
We've been working so hard for women's rights for so many years now, and we can see it's finally coming true.
So overwhelming, but in the best way possible. Like, we never expected that it would be so much of a landslide that it's seeming to be, and that just, it makes it feel so much better because it's the majority, it's what the people of Ireland want, and that's so heartwarming.
Again, very high turnout and 2/3 voting in favour of abortion. Pretty much the reverse of what happened in 1983 when the anti-abortion clause was put into the Constitution and 2/3 of Irish citizens voted in favour in 1983.
Of course, the referendum and the Assembly that prompted it have received their share of criticism.
I think this is wrong. I genuinely believe this referendum should be postponed, that the whole process is compromised, and I would call for a full and immediate audit.
Appeals to postpone or challenge the result of the referendum centered on the belief that it served as an end run around the existing policymaking process. But this is a poor characterization, because citizen assemblies are, by design, not sweeping, all-powerful bodies. They don't write policy or even define what goes up for referenda. In fact, multiple constitutional amendments put to referenda have actually been rejected. While you could point to this as a failure of the deliberative model, an example of how inaccurate and unrepresentative their outcomes can be, I would argue that this is the very point of the Assembly.
The government and the Parliament retain complete control. Citizens' assemblies are an assistance and a support to the political system.
The government responses and referenda are not rubber stamp ceremonies to give the assembly recommendations the seal of populist approval. Of course, deliberation can't guarantee every conclusion will be the most moral under liberal democratic standards. Assemblies aren't magic wands to wave and fix all of our problems. If, say, an assembly concludes interracial marriage should be prohibited, that's not a result we want implemented. But the way the process is structured in Ireland nudges them away from adopting the most extreme positions. And again, the Assembly's conclusions aren't automatically adopted. So they're designed both internally and within the broader system, allow them to resist illiberal policy decisions. The success of Ireland's Citizens' Assembly shouldn't be derived from the specific reforms it's driven, but rather from how it manages to integrate citizen voices further into a balanced system, precisely at a time when exasperation with the political system was high and culture war hostilities threatened to further divide the nation. Ireland's democracy found a way through. But the question remains, can it work anywhere?
Not every issue is suitable for a citizens' assembly. You might ask in the current climate whether nuclear power is a proper or a useful or a valuable energy source. But would you ask a random group of 100 citizens to design you a nuclear power station? Probably not.
I think where citizen assemblies have done their best work is generally on morally focused issues where we're talking about what are the general principles involved, what do we believe as a country or a nation or as a population or whatever you want to call it. It's kind of those big value questions. We're not talking about do we fill a pothole in Ballina. We're talking about how do we deal with the demographic crisis of an aging population? How do we deal with global climate change? How do we deal with the ethics of abortion? These are like really massive issues.
What Ireland's experiment has shown is that we often take a rather narrow view of democracy. Elections, representatives, policymaking, and more are all part of it, but they are not the end-all, be-all.
It isn't good because it's a dry mechanical structure that forces a vote. It's that it promotes discussion about the issues and that it encourages people to think about them. The good part of democracy is not the outcome of the final vote, but the discussion that comes before it.
Hey there again, Landry here. I just wanted to thank you for watching this video and ask that if you did, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, in case you didn't already know, The Unpopulist is a whole digital publication we put together where we publish podcasts, analysis, and essays from some of the greatest minds in modern liberalism almost every other day of the week. And the best part is, it is 100% completely free. Just go to theunpopulist.net and you can subscribe to make sure every piece gets sent directly to your inbox as soon as they go live. And finally, I wanted to let you know that The Unpopulist's publisher, the Institute for the Study of Modern Authoritarianism, or ISMA, is hosting its first ever conference on liberalism in the 21st century in just a few weeks in Washington, D.C. So many experts are going to be there, and we can't wait to share this with you. So just go to ismaglobal.org to find out more. Once again, thanks so much. We'll see you very soon.